What if everything you thought about the Vikings was wrong? Imagine a world where these legendary warriors weren't just fierce blonde-haired, blue-eyed conquerors but a genetically diverse group, shaped by centuries of migration and cultural exchange. This isn't just speculation. Modern genetic science has shattered long-held myths about who the Vikings really were. For centuries, history painted Vikings as a uniform group of Scandinavian warriors, spreading terror across Europe. But recent breakthroughs in DNA analysis have revealed a different story. The largest ever study of Viking genetics, published in Nature, examined over 400 ancient skeletons from Viking-era sites across Europe and Greenland. What scientists found was astonishing. Vikings were far from a homogeneous people. Instead, their DNA carried traces of Middle Eastern, Asian, and Southern European ancestry, proving that Viking societies were deeply interconnected with the rest of the world. So how did this happen? The Vikings were not just raiders. They were traders, explorers, and settlers. They established vast networks across Europe, the Middle East, and even as far as North America. Along the way, they mixed with local populations, absorbing new genes into their bloodline. This means that the genetic identity of a Viking was not defined by pure Scandinavian heritage but rather by shared culture, ambition, and a fearless spirit. One of the most surprising findings comes from an ancient skeleton buried in York, England. Scientists discovered that this individual, who lived during Roman times, long before the traditional Viking age, had 25% Scandinavian ancestry. This suggests that Norse migrations into Britain began centuries earlier than previously believed. And in Scotland's Orkney and Shetland Islands, modern DNA studies have found that Norse genetic markers are still prevalent today, proving that Viking settlements left a lasting impact on these regions. But Viking DNA didn't just influence their direct descendants. Some genetic traits linked to the Vikings, like immunity to certain diseases, high metabolism rates, and even a predisposition to adventure-seeking behavior, are still found in people across Europe. The Viking Genes Project is currently studying how these ancient genetic imprints affect modern health, showing that the legacy of these explorers isn't just in history books, it's written in our DNA. This discovery forces us to rethink the Viking identity. They weren't a single, isolated people but a global force, shaped by countless influences. Their true legacy isn't just their raids or legendary longships, it's the lasting imprint they left in the genes of millions today. So next time you hear the word Viking, remember, they were more than warriors. They were the ultimate pioneers of their time. For centuries, the Viking image has been carved into our minds, fierce Scandinavian warriors, bound by blood and tradition, sailing across stormy seas to raid and conquer. But what if this image is more legend than fact? The truth, hidden beneath layers of mythology, has only recently been uncovered through the lens of modern science. Genetic research has revealed that the Vikings were not the homogeneous group history painted them to be. In fact, their DNA tells a story of diversity, migration, and cultural fusion that challenges everything we thought we knew. Historians long believed Vikings were a distinct Scandinavian people, isolated in the north until they exploded onto the world stage around the 8th century. But recent genetic studies tell a different story. A groundbreaking project analyzed the genomes of over 400 Viking-era skeletons from sites across Europe and Greenland. What they found defied expectations. Vikings carried genetic markers not just from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, but from southern Europe, the Middle East, and even Central Asia. This wasn't just a twist in the tale, it was a complete rewrite. So, how did such genetic diversity find its way into Viking society? The answer lies in the Vikings' role not just as raiders, but as traders, settlers, and explorers. Their voyages took them far beyond the borders of Scandinavia. They navigated rivers deep into the heart of Russia, crossed into the Middle East along ancient trade routes, and established settlements as far west as Newfoundland. With every journey, they encountered new cultures, formed alliances, and, most importantly, intermarried with local populations. The result? A rich genetic mosaic woven into the fabric of Viking identity. Take, for example, the case of a Roman-era skeleton discovered in York, England. Analysis revealed that this individual had Scandinavian ancestry, centuries before the Viking Age officially began. This discovery suggests that Norse migrations and interactions with other cultures started long before the iconic Viking raids. Similarly, in Scotland's Orkney and Shetland Islands, modern DNA studies show that Norse ancestry remains strong to this day. blending seamlessly with local genetic lines. What's fascinating is that this diversity didn't dilute Viking culture, it strengthened it. Being a Viking wasn't about pure bloodlines. It was about shared language, customs, and a fierce spirit of adventure. In Viking burial sites, archaeologists have found people with non-Scandinavian features laid to rest with traditional Viking weapons and jewelry, honored as equals in death as they were in life. This revelation doesn't diminish the Vikings' legacy, it enriches it. It shows that their true power wasn't just in their swords or ships but in their ability to adapt, connect, and thrive across cultures. They weren't just conquerors, they were bridges between worlds, their bloodlines carrying the story of humanity's endless journey across borders and time. The Vikings are often remembered as fearless warriors and seafaring raiders, but beneath the surface of this legendary image lies a genetic story that redefines who they truly were. Recent discoveries have revealed that the Vikings were not just a product of Scandinavia. They were a fusion of diverse ancestries, shaped by centuries of migration and cultural exchange. Their genes tell the tale of a people connected to the world in ways history never fully acknowledged. When scientists conducted a large-scale study, analyzing the genomes of over 400 Viking-era skeletons from archaeological sites across Europe and Greenland, the results were nothing short of astonishing. They found significant genetic diversity among Viking populations. This wasn't just a case of Scandinavian DNA stretching outward. It was also about foreign genes flowing into Scandinavia itself. Long before the Viking Age officially began, waves of migration had already shaped the genetic landscape of the North. This means that Viking society was not built on isolated bloodlines but was the result of continuous interaction with neighboring and distant cultures. One of the most surprising discoveries was the presence of Southern European and Middle Eastern genetic markers in Viking remains. This suggests that the Vikings weren't just exporting their influence, they were also absorbing people, ideas, and genes from far-off lands. Whether through trade, warfare, or alliances, they encountered diverse populations and formed connections that left lasting genetic imprints. In fact, some Viking burial sites have revealed individuals with distinctly non-Scandinavian features, yet they were honored with traditional Viking artifacts, highlighting their full integration into Norse society. The evidence of Viking diversity doesn't stop at their graves. Modern genetic studies in regions where Vikings once settled, such as the British Isles, Ireland, and even Russia, reveal traces of Norse ancestry mixed seamlessly with local populations. In the Orkney and Shetland Islands, for example, a significant percentage of the modern population carries Viking genes, reflecting centuries of intermarriage and cultural blending. Even in Greenland, the remains of Viking settlers show a complex mix of Scandinavian and indigenous genetic traits. This diversity challenges the traditional view of Vikings as a singular ethnic group. Instead, it paints a picture of a dynamic, adaptable society that thrived on connection rather than isolation. The Vikings didn't just conquer, they integrated. They didn't just travel, they transformed both themselves and the cultures they encountered. Their genetic legacy is a testament to the power of human movement, exchange, and adaptation. So, when we think of the Vikings, we should move beyond the image of uniformity and see them for what they truly were: a melting pot of genes, cultures, and stories that stretched across continents. Their bloodlines didn't just flow from the north. They carried the echoes of every land and people they encountered. Across Europe, the Vikings left more than just the ruins of raided monasteries and tales of conquest. They left traces of their very DNA, woven into the genetic fabric of the people they encountered. Recent discoveries have revealed surprising evidence of Viking ancestry far beyond Scandinavia, challenging the idea that their influence was limited to warfare and short-lived settlements. In fact, the genetic legacy of the Vikings stretches across continents, hidden within the genes of modern populations. One of the most striking revelations comes from ancient burial sites in Britain. In York, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an individual from the Roman era, centuries before the traditional start of the Viking Age. When scientists analyzed his DNA, they found that about 25% of his ancestry was Scandinavian. This unexpected discovery suggests that the connection between Britain and Scandinavia began long before Viking raids were recorded in history. It hints at early migrations, trade routes, or even isolated settlements that predate the Viking Age entirely. Moving north to Scotland, particularly the Orkney and Shetland Islands, the genetic influence of the Vikings is even more profound. Studies of the modern population in these regions reveal that a significant portion of their DNA traces back to Norse ancestors. But it's not just about genetic markers, it's about cultural integration. The Norse didn't just pass through these islands. They settled, married into local communities, and left a legacy that's still visible today. Not only in the genes of the people but also in place names, traditions, and even language. In Ireland, genetic studies have uncovered Viking ancestry in populations living around ancient Norse strongholds like Dublin. While history often focuses on the Vikings' role as invaders, their genetic imprint tells a different story, one of long-term settlement and assimilation. They didn't just conquer, they became part of the local fabric, blending their bloodlines with those of the people they once raided. The Viking genetic footprint extends even further east. In Russia, the remains of Viking traders and warriors along the river routes that connected Scandinavia to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world reveal a diverse mix of ancestries. Here, Viking DNA mingled with Slavic, Turkic, and Middle Eastern genes, reflecting the complex web of relationships forged through trade, exploration, and migration. These discoveries paint a picture of Vikings not just as warriors but as connectors of worlds. Their genetic legacy isn't confined to Scandinavia. It stretches across Europe and beyond, carried in the blood of millions today. Their story isn't just one of conquest, it's a tale of movement, integration, and lasting influence that reshaped the genetic landscape of an entire continent. The Vikings may have vanished from the pages of history, but their legacy is far from gone. In fact, it's hidden in plain sight, etched into the very DNA of people living today. Recent genetic research has revealed that the Vikings left more than just stories, artifacts, and ruins behind. They left a biological footprint, with their genes still influencing the health, traits, and even behaviors of modern populations across Europe and beyond. Studies like the Viking Genes Project have dived deep into this genetic legacy, uncovering how ancient Viking DNA continues to shape us. In regions where Vikings settled, such as the British Isles, Ireland, and parts of Russia, modern populations carry genetic markers directly linked to Norse ancestry. But these aren't just historical curiosities. These genetic traces have real-world impacts on health and biology. For example, certain Viking genes are associated with metabolic efficiency. This trait might have helped their ancestors survive harsh Scandinavian winters, where food was scarce and endurance was key. Today, those same genes are linked to how some people process fats and sugars, potentially influencing conditions like obesity or diabetes. What once gave the Vikings an evolutionary advantage might now affect modern health in unexpected ways. Another fascinating discovery is the connection between Viking ancestry and the immune system. Some genetic variants inherited from Norse ancestors appear to boost immunity against specific diseases, a trait that would have been vital for populations constantly on the move, facing new pathogens in unfamiliar territories. However, these same genes might also increase the risk of autoimmune disorders in today's populations, illustrating the complex trade-offs of genetic inheritance. But it's not just about physical traits. There's growing interest in how Viking genes might influence behavioral tendencies. While this area of study is still developing, some researchers suggest that certain genetic markers related to risk-taking, exploration, and even aggression could be traced back to Viking ancestors. It's a provocative idea, that the bold spirit of adventure that drove the Vikings across oceans might still echo in the DNA of their descendants. In places like Scotland's Orkney Islands, where Viking ancestry is especially strong, researchers are even using genetic studies to explore how these ancient genes affect local health patterns today. This isn't just about looking back. It's about understanding how the past continues to shape the present, right down to the cellular level. The Vikings may have disappeared as a culture, but their legacy lives on. Not just in museums or history books, but in the genes of millions of people around the world. Their story isn't just a tale of the past, it's written in our blood, influencing who we are today in ways we're only beginning to understand. The Vikings are often remembered for their epic sagas, fearsome raids, and legendary longships, but their greatest legacy might be the one hidden beneath the surface, woven into the very fabric of human history. Recent genetic research has done more than just uncover their diverse ancestry. It has forced historians to rethink what it truly meant to be a Viking. The revelations from ancient DNA challenge not only the myths surrounding Viking identity but also how we understand the movement, adaptation, and integration of ancient societies. For centuries, History portrayed the Vikings as a singular, uniform group of Scandinavian warriors, bound by blood and culture. But the truth is far more complex. The latest genetic studies reveal that the Vikings were not defined by a single ethnic identity. Instead, they were a dynamic, multicultural society shaped by the people they met, the lands they settled, and the genes they exchanged. Their identity wasn't carved in stone. It evolved with every new voyage, every new settlement, and every new relationship formed across distant shores. What does this mean for our understanding of history? It means that the Viking Age wasn't just an era of conquest and exploration. It was a period of profound cultural and genetic fusion. The Vikings didn't just leave their mark through battles and settlements. They connected continents, bridged cultures, and became part of the communities they encountered. Their influence wasn't a one-way street. As much as they shaped the world shaped them in return. Consider the Viking presence in places like Ireland, Scotland, and even Russia. Archaeological and genetic evidence shows that these weren't just temporary outposts or military strongholds. They were thriving, diverse communities where Norse traditions mixed with local customs, languages blended, and new identities emerged. Viking society was as much about adaptation as it was about adventure. They absorbed the best of what other cultures had to offer, from art and technology to new ways of living and thinking. This revelation challenges the very idea of what it means to belong to a culture. The Vikings show us that identity isn't static. It's fluid, ever-changing, and influenced by countless factors: migration, trade, conflict, and cooperation. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not just about isolated civilizations rising and falling. It's about the endless connections between people, the invisible threads that tie us together across time and space. So, when we think of the Vikings today, we should see them not just as fierce warriors or legendary seafarers, but as a symbol of humanity's timeless journey, always moving, always evolving, and always connected. Their true legacy isn't just in the sagas or the artifacts left behind. It's in the living, breathing story of how cultures meet, mix, and create something entirely new. The story of the Vikings isn't just written in ancient texts or carved into runestones. It lives on in ways far more personal and profound. Their legacy isn't just about the lands they conquered or the ships they sailed. It's embedded in the very DNA of people around the world. But beyond genetics and history, the real question is, what does this legacy mean for us today? The Vikings were more than warriors. They were adventurers, traders, settlers, and bridge builders between cultures. Their journeys connected distant parts of the world long before globalization was even a concept. They weren't defined by borders or limited by their origins. Instead, they thrived on their ability to adapt, to integrate, and to leave a lasting impact wherever they went. This isn't just a historical fact. It's a lesson for us today about the power of connection, diversity, and cultural exchange. In many ways, the Viking spirit lives on, not just in the genes passed down through generations, but in the mindset they embodied. The drive to explore the unknown, to embrace new ideas, and to challenge boundaries is part of what made them so influential. And that same spirit can be seen today in the way we connect across continents, share knowledge, and build communities that transcend borders. Their story also reminds us that history is rarely simple. It's easy to fall into the trap of seeing the past in black and white, heroes and villains, invaders and natives, us and them. But the Vikings' genetic and cultural legacy shows that history is messy, complex, and full of unexpected connections. People have always moved, mixed, and influenced one another, and that's what makes our shared story so rich. So, when you think of the Vikings, don't just picture them as distant figures from a forgotten age. See them as part of an ongoing human journey, one that's still unfolding. Their blood runs through millions of people today, but their true legacy is even bigger than that. It's in the way we explore, connect, and evolve as a global community.